This next question is directed to Dr. Hutchinson, but I think I'm going to ask it to you first, and you'll see why. The question is, and it's from Professor Ken Brown. He put his name in it, so I'll read it.
Hey, Ken.
And if I'm butchering it, you can yell now or talk to me later. So, should the rejection of scientism in any way challenge committed atheists who value science to rethink their atheism? So it's asking, I think, what does rejecting scientism, what work does that actually do? Like, how does it really have atheists in its sights? So I thought it would make sense to ask you, does rejecting scientism even bother you? Or is that something in the way that Dr. Hutchinson has framed it that you would also just actually agree with?
Right, so I think I kind of touched on this a little if I understand the question correctly. If you can reject scientism and say there's all these other ways of getting to knowledge besides even science broadly conceived, say, that to me doesn't seem to touch atheism because, again, you still have all your work in front of you to go to any particular religion. And I have one specific example I can think of. Let's say that you grant for the sake of argument that the Christian God exists. And let's say somebody has an internal revelation or experience of talking to God or communing with God or experiencing God in some fashion. And we've already established that the Christian God actually exists. When that person has that experience, do they automatically assume, oh, I really was talking to the actual Christian God? Or do they take the principle of skepticism and say, well, maybe I just made that up, or maybe I was doing that to myself, or maybe my brain played a trick on me. So even if you admit that the Christian God exists, you still have to bring the principle of skepticism and how you develop knowledge in a proper way to the table. So even if you can say there's, these other forms of knowledge, you still have to demonstrate that they're going to be valid, and that internal personal experience, there's no way to validate that.
All personal experiences are internal. The way we know everything is internal. So just referring to something as a personal internal experience doesn't discount the fact that we must pay attention to things. So I had trouble with your early statements on this because I couldn't really see it as black and white as you're suggesting. I mean, obviously, everything we think we know, we could be mistaken. We could be having hallucinations, okay? So there isn't, it seems to me, a functional way that you can tell what is a reliable experience versus something that could be a hallucination, other than the reproducibility and clarity that I have said are the characteristics of natural science. And so we as humans develop a sense of what is reliable in our experience by constructing a model of the world that we believe is out there. I think you're all out there. I can just see you, but I think you're all out there. So, to me, I think you're setting up a little bit of a false black and white way of thinking about knowledge, because I think all of our knowledge is actually much more vague than you are willing to accept. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So there is that one crucial difference when the content of the internal experience is still within some person's head. So if I see a tree, and everything you said could apply to that, seeing the tree, but the content of my experience, that tree, is not inside my head. It's out there, and that means we can verify it, and we can use the principles of reproducibility and clarity for that. But when the experience is completely within here, if there's nothing outside of the brain that you can point to, then there's no way to verify it, as evidenced by, let's say you have two people with a religious revelation and their conceptions of God are completely mutually exclusive. There's no way, even in principle, to adjudicate that. And of course, that's what we see in the world. There's different religions and people have different revelations of God that are mutually exclusive. There's nowhere to go with that.
That might lead well to, or would you like to respond
No,
first?
no, let's move on.
There's a question here that might be relevant for you. It says here, sadness is a feeling, yet can we not believe someone who feels sad because it is a personal experience? And
Pardon me, can we not believe?
someone who feels sad. And I think it's asking, from looking at it, just about the feeling of sadness. Would we know that we feel sad? Since it's personal, it's internal, it doesn't have that external verification to it.
Well, as far as I can tell, I might need to think about this a little more, but it seems to me that when you're sad, that is a completely internal feeling, and it's just as much of an immediate given as it is as to how I see the color blue, as I had referenced earlier. Foreseeing sadness in another person, was that part of the question?
I think it's, well, it doesn't say.
Yeah. Well, in that case, again, we use principles we use knowledge that's built up fundamentally on principles that science also uses, but we develop informally throughout our life. I gave the example of my wife and I knowing when somebody wants to leave a party. That's because humans are very good at reading each other's faces, and throughout our lives, we see many people who are sad. Other people have labeled them as sad, so we build up a general picture. Reproducibility fits right into that. And we know what it's like when somebody looks sad, how they act, exactly because of that scientific principle of reproducibility.
So if I could just pick up on this one. I mean, the sadness example is similar to the love for an infant example that Paul gave us earlier, and I disagree with what you said about that. So it's certainly the case that we can analyze the brain and we can see chemicals being activated, neurons firing, and so on and so forth. Not terribly well, but we're getting better at this all the time, and we'll know it much better. But when science has had all of its say about how the brain is working, is it still true to say that a person is sad, or is it still true to say that the mother loves the infant? I say, yes, it is, okay? And I say that there is a meaning in that recognition which goes beyond, the measurement of the chemical concentrations and the pH and goodness knows what that's going on in the brain. It's not that I say, that the science is false or has made a mistake. I just say it isn't addressing the issue. And the issue is the intangible, and in this case, these are talking about emotions, but I think there are many other intangibles in life that ultimately science can't address. To give a different one that's not just psychological, you could ask yourself the question, is there such a thing as justice? Okay? Is there such a thing as justice? Does justice exist? Not is everything just, but is there meaning to that word justice beyond sort of pure pragmatism? And it seems to me that those kinds of concepts, those intangibles, are things which science, natural science as I mean it, really isn't competent to discover.
Very quick. I would say that any knowledge that's worthy of the word knowledge has to have clarity to it. So when the intangibles remain unclear, we don't even know what it is we're claiming.
Okay.